Thank you, Taylor. I am sharing my screen, and is it coming up?
Yep, looks good.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak to the group this morning, Taylor, and also to Ayman Mustafa. The previous life that I had before working in turf grass was in vegetable crops, and I used to receive all the phone calls from people moving to Arizona and wanting to grow something to start making money. And I'm still here with the extension in the University of Arizona, never found that crop to make that money. So glad that this seminar is being presented. So somebody may be able to eventually hit the jackpot, finding something to grow here profitably in Arizona. What I'll talk to you today about will be weed management, the principles and strategies, just some basics about weed control, especially when trying to grow specialty crops or something that is relatively new or intensive, that quality of the product is of utmost importance. So I'll talk about some of these things in general. The first thing most people need to do is understand that there's going to be competition from weeds, and in trying to grow their desirable crop, basically a weed is going to be an unwanted plant, undesirable plants, plants that are growing out of place and where they're not wanted, and they most importantly interfere with the desirable crop plant. And that is the part that I think people should understand, that when these weeds are growing, that they are taking the available light, nutrients, and water from the crop plant, and that the crop plant is that component that you want to be able to devote the most effort to growing so that you get your quality for your marketing potential. The weed characteristics are that they are going to exploit any open space at any time. And so then they will be competing with your crop, as I said previously, for the water, the nutrients, and the light. Most times weeds will grow quickly and they will get up and over the plants that you're wanting to grow for a crop. And so it will delay the maturation and the harvest time that you want to be able to hit a market at a specific time. So weeds are significantly detrimental to growing your crops. Classifying weeds, you could classify them in many different ways. And generally here in the desert, in the Southwest, we have a couple of weeds that are summer and winter. Right now, as we're going into the fall winter season, we're going to start seeing our winter weed spectrum. We just came out of the summer, and we're probably dealing with cleaning out a lot of these carcasses of the summer weeds that have died off. Most of these weeds that occur here summer or during the winter season, they'll be annuals or they'll be perennials. Most times the weeds that come up and live only one season are going to be your annuals. Depicted on the left side of the screen there is a cycle of an annual weed, where from a seed it's dispersed, and then the seedling germinates with rainfall or when irrigation water is applied. That seedling emerges, matures, and puts out a flower. The flower turns to a seed, and that seed is dropped, and it goes through the cycle again. the next year. A perennial weed, such as a perennial nutsedge or Bermuda grass as a weed, it is a perennial weed that can be grown from seed, or it will have an organ, a deep-rooted tuber, or a rhizome system with deep roots that enables the plant to regrow by storing carbohydrates in that root system so that it can reemerge a second year or a third year. The perennial also can produce seeds and go through a life cycle similar to an annual. So it has two mechanisms of being able to survive and to grow and be able to persist year after year and not be dependent on the seedling growth, but it has larger tubers or rhizomes underground that enables it to grow very rapidly and vigorously compared to a seed that germinates. Some are common weeds that we see here in Arizona. They are the annual broadleaf weeds. You see the list here. Right now, during the winter season, we're going to start seeing the emergence of many of the mustard-related weeds, the cruciferous type weeds. They're going to be your shepherd's purses, London rockets. We'll see the weeds related to the lettuces, like prickly lettuce or sow thistle. And then we'll see cheeseweed or malva, the big broadleaf weed that'll grow very tall and have very robust root systems. Then also we see the clovers, burr clover and sweet clover, and many other weeds that come up through the winter that will be highly competitive with any kind of a crop that we would be desiring to grow. During the summer season, we have our broadleaf weeds such as purslane, spurge, many of the thistles, and these are the type of weeds that are probably drying up right now, setting seed and dispersing their seeds. Driving along roadsides, you'll probably see a lot of the amaranthus species or the pigweeds. The Palmer amaranth is one of these more difficult to control weeds today because it is becoming resistant to herbicides such as glyphosate. We also categorize weeds as grasses in comparison to the broadleaves. The grass weeds, they are also summer and winter. Right now, we're seeing the crabgrasses, the water grasses, the foxtails. Those are not necessarily the foxtails, but the cup grasses. We see those starting to dry up and they are dropping seed. The foxtails in the Midwest, there are summer annual foxtails, but here in the desert, we have winter, in quotes, foxtail type weeds that are typically your broma species. We just call them foxtails because they do look like a fox's tail, and our species are basically during the winter season that we'll start seeing emerge. Poa annua, annual bluegrass, is starting to germinate when moisture is applied to our cold, cooler soils at this time of the year. It's very common occurrences are in turf grasses, but they do occur in a lot of bare ground areas and in cropping situations. The perennial grasses, Bermuda grass is our #1 perennial grass that we have in the desert. Quackgrass might occur up in the high elevation areas around the state, but it is not as prevalent here in Arizona as you might find in the Midwest part of the US. The perennials, also we have the sedges. They are neither grass nor broadleaf weed. The purple or yellow nut sedge is probably the more common ones. And in most of my research and trying to control sedges, I defer and default saying that we have more purple nut sedge. If you are able to control purple nut sedge, you'll be easily controlling yellow nut sedge along the way. Some of the other cooler parts of the state, southeast part of the state, you might find wild garlic and wild onion in some situations, but generally they aren't as widespread as the purple and yellow nut sedges in Arizona. If you're not sure what kind of a weed you might have that you're dealing with, this is a reference book that I say that most field people should have in their truck with them, The Weeds of the West. This is a publication that was put out by the Western Society of Weed Science probably 20, 30 years ago. It is now out of print. They stopped printing it, and there might be some copies that are still out there available online or through some of the websites. You might try the Western Society of Weed Science website, and it may be available with any remaining stock. Another one that I think is a little bit bulkier to carry in a truck, but every office of a farm operation should have, would be The Weeds of California and Other Western States by Jody Tomaso at the University of California, Davis. He put together a 2-volume book of very good images and descriptions of weeds, and also adding to the descriptions are their life cycles and their habits and relatives of their different families. So this is a very good reference that I think anybody and everybody who is into dealing with weeds should have available as a resource. Here's one that we have available locally. This is our Handbook of Pests that we have on our Arizona Pest Management Center website. You can easily get hold of this, and it describes many of the more common weeds that we have here in Arizona. Controlling weeds, there are basically 3 methods that people can be using, and most of these can be all integrated in some way, shape, or form so that you're not dependent only on one feature, but integrating biological, cultural, and chemical means so that we can minimize the impact of weeds on the crops that we're desiring to grow. Biological control is basically natural occurrence of methods that will control or suppress weeds. And mildews, diseases can occur on plants. Insects can attack plants. And here's a couple of examples where powdery mildew is attacking a sow thistle plant. You can see that the biocontrol is a little late in occurring. The weed has already matured, it has flowered, and it has put out seed, and then the disease is weakening the foliage. This is way too late, and unfortunately is going to be still competitive with the desirable crop species. The same thing with the puncture vine seed weevil. It attacks the seed of the puncture vine plant. The weevil more than likely would not attack every seed that the plant develops, but it will attack a sufficient number to help reduce populations over time. But you still have escaping seed heads that will go ahead and produce these seeds. So biological control can work, but timing wise and efficacy wise to be 100% control, it just doesn't quite occur because they are a little bit slow in developing. But given a population that might be at a manageable level, a biocontrol method may be beneficial in some cases. The biggest area that most people should implement would be different cultural control measures. There are preventive practices. Before planting a crop, you should ensure that you have purchased clean seed, that the seed does not contain any noxious weeds or any weed seeds while it was being harvested and processed. When you have weeds that emerge in competing with the crop, you should remove them before they start to flower and before they set seed. What happens is if they drop the seed, you are perpetuating that weed problem for the years to come. So the sooner that those weed plants can be removed from competition, the better. You can suppress weeds by mulching, using plasticulture, or using natural mulches. You could put down top dressings, tree trimmings, a lot of tree materials can be used, or plant materials, composting materials can be used to create a mulch and a barrier that prevents weeds from coming up. Prior to planting, you could use solarization. You can cook the soil and eliminate some of the seed that are near the surface, putting a clear plastic or black plastic over the soil for a period of time during the summer, especially here in Arizona. You could cook the soil to high enough temperatures that the weed seeds can be destroyed. You can manage weeds by managing irrigation. The water that is applied to a soil will rapidly germinate the weed seed. You can do that in anticipation of weeds coming in a new piece of ground. You can pre-irrigate, germinate the weeds, and then go back in and cultivate, burying those emerged weeds, and then plant the crop after those weeds have been eliminated. You can use cover crops. Ursula talked about cover crops. The use of cover crops can help with putting back mulches, or it can help putting back the residues that can be detrimental to emergence of some of the weed seeds by phenomenon of allelopathy. So there can be different practices used culturally ahead of planting a crop that will help manage weeds. Mechanical practices would be hand hoeing or using tillage implements. As I mentioned before, you could till the ground prior to planting and get rid of the emerged weeds after you force them up, and then be able to plant into a cleaner field because the weed seeds have already germinated. You could cultivate in season using cultivation equipment. Cultivators can be set on hitches on a tractor, or you can go through with a hand hoeing crew if you have enough labor available. Flaming and steaming are also mechanisms that could be used for mechanical weed control. Some of the cultural techniques, it's a little bit on the wild side and extreme, but anytime you put a tractor in the field, you can cultivate and clean up weeds. Probably the most important thing, as I mentioned previously, was the preventive measures by scouting and monitoring, then properly identifying the weeds that you have and keeping records of the species and the amounts of weeds that come at certain times of the year, and especially prior to planting or during the crop growth. And then again, ensuring clean seed by making sure that you don't have any weed seed in your weed supply. Chemical weed control methods, you have selective and non-selective methods. You can control selectively broadleaf weeds in a grass crop, or you can selectively control grass weeds in a broadleaf crop. You can control weeds with pre-emergence means, or once the weeds have emerged, you can also control them again. And so you have options available to selectively pick and choose what chemicals you can apply before the crop has emerged, or once the weed has emerged, you can also control them in some situations when the crop has emerged and the weed is competing. The non-selective means you controlling both the crop and the weed, and so you have to selectively physically be able to put a barrier so that you do not contact these type of herbicides on your desirable crop. You can put shields up that will protect your crop and be able to kill the weeds between the rows. In the rows, that will become very difficult to do, where you might be able to use some of the selective herbicides that will protect your crop and be able to control the weed in the row. These non-selective herbicides, you can burn down weeds on contact with a post-emergence product, or you can find a herbicide that can translocate once it's contacted and entered the plant. And in some cases, there could be some pre-emergence control with some of these products that would give you a little bit more residual control. The pre-emergence herbicides, they have to be soil applied in most cases. They're absorbed by the root or the shoot of the germinating seed. The herbicides may or may not move inside the plant. And then in most cases, your grass weeds are going to be more easily controlled with these pre-emergence herbicides. There are some broadleaf weed herbicides, but in most cases, the grasses are more easily controlled by these pre-emergence herbicides. They are somehow or another a little bit more selective towards controlling grasses. The post-emergence herbicides, they have to be applied to the foliage of an emerged plant. They penetrate the leaf cuticle, and then they can kill the plant by contact, or they translocate and move to the growing points in the growing weed. They can be fast acting by contact or slow acting when they translocate, and they can be selective or non-selective. Your pre-emergence herbicides, most of them that we use in crop systems are going to be the yellow herbicides. They are things like treflan, pendimethalin, trifluralin is a treflan, pendimethalin. Those are applied to the soil. They inhibit the roots, and they must be tilled in or watered in to activate in the soil. An organic herbicide, corn gluten meal, can prevent weeds in some situations. They are not selective. They will kill all plants, including the crop. However, you require a high amount of product at about 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. I have not had any experience using this product, but some of the Midwestern areas where this came from in Iowa, they see success with this particular product. The post-emergence herbicides, the non-selective products, you can use things like glyphosate, glufosinate, diquat, pelargonic acid, vinegar, citric acid, clove oil combinations. They kill anything and everything. The selective herbicides, the 2,4-D type relatives, they will kill only the broadleaf weeds. And then some of the grass killing herbicides, as I call them, the fops and dims, some of the fluazafop or fusilade herbicide will kill grasses only, and you can safely apply them in broadleaf crops. Here are some of the products that are out there and available. The glyphosate, glufosinate, diquat is a burning herbicide that works very fast, just like the pelargonic acid, the vinegar, and the citric acids. They are all fast acting, while the glyphosate and the glufosinate are slower acting. The selective herbicides, you can control your grass weeds in a broadleaf crop a little bit more easily than you can use 2,4-D type relatives, which can be detrimental to your crop plants. So in summary, I think that some of the principles that you should be aware of before getting into growing plants and be able to harvest something successfully without competition, properly ID the weeds. You have several resources available, or you can even come to us here at the extension office and we can help you identify your weed problems. The multifaceted approach of integrating cultural methods as well as biological and being able to use chemicals is probably the best approach, because you have all the tools in the toolbox available to you to be able to control the weeds in an efficient and an economical manner. Pre-emergence herbicides can be used for many crops and can be applied at different types of the seasons, but you have to be sure that the label says that you can use it in a particular crop. Not all crops are tolerant of pre-emergence herbicides, so it's critical that you have to apply it at the right time for the right crops. And the same goes for post-emergence herbicides, that you should be treating the small weeds when the crops are first emerging, so you can get in between the rows. Once you're closing the canopy and trying to control weeds that are really big in competition with the crop, weeds are hard to control. And then you also have options to be able to utilize synthetic herbicides, which are highly safe and economical and effective, versus many of the organic products, which are burn down type herbicides that have to be applied to small sized weeds in a very timely manner, and probably need to be applying them a little bit more frequently. So there are many options to consider that can be implemented and help you be able to grow a crop successfully. That's basically it, I believe. And so if there's any time for any questions, I could try to handle them. Thank you.